At 8 years old, most kids are worried about cartoons and recess. But some kids are worried about something else entirely. Is mom okay today? Is dad going to come home angry again? If I stay quiet enough, maybe everything will be fine. That child wasn't mature. That child was surviving. And if that was you, this video is going to hit differently. Because some children don't lose their childhood all at once. It disappears slowly, quietly, psychologically. They smile more, cry less, speak carefully, watch everything. They learn to read the room before they even speak. They become experts at emotional survival before they even understand what emotions are. And eventually, they become the emotional thermostat of the household, shrinking or adjusting themselves depending on what the room needs. If people are angry, they become quiet. If people are sad, they become helpful. If people are unstable, they become invisible. And the world sees that child and says, "You're so mature, you're so responsible, you're so strong." But nobody asks the real question, at what cost? Because strength learned through fear is not the same thing as strength learned through safety. And children who grow up too fast usually aren't becoming adults early. They're abandoning themselves early. Psychologists call this parentification. It's when a child is forced into the emotional role of an adult long before their brain is ready for it. The child becomes the caregiver, the peacekeeper, the therapist, the emotional support system. Sometimes they take care of younger siblings. Sometimes they take care of a depressed parent. Sometimes they become responsible for keeping the entire house emotionally stable. And the terrifying part is they don't even realize it's happening. Because to a child, survival feels normal. When chaos is all you've known, you stop recognizing chaos as chaos. You just call it home. And over time, the brain adapts. Psychologists call this hypervigilance. You're constantly scanning for danger, reading facial expressions, predicting moods, preparing for emotional explosions before they happen. You learn exactly which version of yourself keeps people calm. And slowly, that version becomes your identity. You become the easy child, the overachiever, the listener, the one who never asks for too much. You become so good at managing other people's emotions that you completely lose touch with your own. And here's the tragic part. The world rewards you for it. Teachers praise your maturity. Friends admire your calmness. People call you wise for your age. But underneath all of that wisdom is usually a terrified child trying to prevent disaster. A child who learned very early that their feelings came second, or maybe not even second, maybe last. So instead of asking, "What do I feel?" you learn to ask, "What will keep everyone else okay?" And that survival pattern doesn't magically disappear when childhood ends. It follows you into adulthood, into your relationships, your career, your self-worth, your nervous system, because the body remembers what the mind tries to minimize. That's why people who grew up in emotional chaos often struggle with rest. When survival mode becomes your default setting, stillness starts to feel dangerous. You sit down to relax, and suddenly you feel guilty. You rest, and your brain tells you you're being lazy. You finally experience peace, and part of you starts waiting for something bad to happen, because your nervous system learned that calmness never lasts. So even in safe environments, your body keeps preparing for danger that isn't there anymore. And most people around you never notice, because externally, you seem functional. You show up, you work hard, you help others, you handle pressure well, but internally, you're exhausted. Not because life is hard right now, but because your body has been bracing for impact for years. And this affects relationships deeply. You may become hyper independent, you struggle to ask for help, you say, "I'm fine" automatically, you handle everything alone because depending on people never felt safe. Or maybe you become the emotional caretaker in every relationship. You attract people who are broken, emotionally unavailable, confused, lost, or constantly in crisis. Not because you're weak, not because you're naive, but because taking care of people became your definition of love. You learned, if I can fix you, maybe you'll stay. So you overgive, overexplain, overanalyze, overtolerate. You ignore your own needs while trying to become emotionally indispensable to everyone else. And eventually, you start feeling invisible because nobody really knows you. They only know the version of you that helps them survive. And the saddest part? Sometimes you don't even know who you are outside of helping others, because your identity was built around being needed, not being loved. There's also another painful symptom people rarely talk about. You start feeling guilty for having needs at all. You apologize too much. You feel bad for taking up space. You hesitate before expressing emotions. You fear becoming too much for people. And when someone finally treats you kindly, it almost feels uncomfortable, suspicious, because deep down, part of you still believes love must be earned through usefulness, not freely given. And this creates a very lonely kind of adulthood. One where you're surrounded by people, yet emotionally isolated. One where everyone depends on you, but nobody checks on you. One where you secretly fantasize about finally breaking down in front of someone, and instead of being abandoned, being held. That fantasy matters because it reveals something important. There is still a child inside you waiting for rescue, still hoping someone will notice the pain behind the competence, still hoping someone will say, "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." And if that longing exists inside you, it does not mean you're weak. It means your emotional needs were ignored for so long that your nervous system is still searching for safety. This is why healing begins with validation, not minimizing, not comparing, not saying other people had it worse. Trauma is not measured by how dramatic it looked from the outside. Trauma is measured by what your nervous system had to do in order to survive it. And some children survived by disappearing emotionally, by becoming useful instead of authentic, by becoming calm instead of honest, by becoming strong instead of protected. So if you grew up too fast, you need to stop romanticizing your survival. Yes, you survived, but survival is not the same thing as being okay. A child should not have to become emotionally intelligent just to feel safe at home. A child should not have to manage adult emotions. A child should not have to earn love by abandoning themselves. You deserved comfort, protection, softness, safety. You deserved adults who made you feel like the world was stable, not adults who made you responsible for stabilizing them. And maybe nobody has ever told you this before. You're allowed to grieve the childhood you didn't get to have, the birthdays that felt empty, the fear you carried silently, the emotional burden you were never supposed to hold. You are allowed to be angry about it too, because healing does not begin when you move on. It begins when you finally admit that was too much for a child. And once you acknowledge that, something slowly begins to change. You stop glorifying exhaustion. You stop treating self-neglect like strength. You stop believing your worth depends on how useful you are to others. And slowly, you begin learning something completely unfamiliar: how to receive, to let people help you, to answer honestly when someone asks if you're okay, to rest without guilt, to exist without constantly proving your value. At first, it feels unnatural, maybe even unsafe, but that's because your nervous system was trained for survival, not peace. Healing is teaching your body that you no longer live in the same emotional danger you once did, and that takes time. Sometimes a long time. There will be days you regress, days you shut down, days you feel like that scared child all over again. But that does not mean you're broken. It means the part of you that was ignored for years is finally asking to be seen. So listen to that child. Ask them, what did you need that nobody gave you? Maybe the answer is rest. Maybe it's comfort. Maybe it's affection. Maybe it's permission to stop being strong all the time. And little by little, start giving those things to yourself. Not to erase the past, but to stop reliving it. Because here is the truth. You were never too much. You were just never protected enough. You were never hard to love. You were simply surrounded by people who could not love you in the way you deserved. And none of that was your fault. You were a child carrying emotional weights that even adults struggled to carry. That was never your responsibility. You deserved someone who looked at you and said, this is not your burden. You don't have to fix this. You get to be a kid. But nobody said it. So you grew up too fast. And you've been paying for it ever since. But you don't have to spend the rest of your life surviving. You can learn softness, you can learn boundaries, you can learn safety, you can learn rest, and maybe for the first time in your life, you can learn that love does not require self-abandonment. You never had a childhood, but you still have a future. And this time, you don't have to survive it. You get to live it. And the child who learned to disappear finally deserves to come home.